Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to my Lotus Esprit. Now I haven't made a video for a couple of months just due to family life and doing up the house, as well as another distraction in the garage, but I'll talk about that in another video. So back here with the Lotus Esprit, the last video I did on this was the body removal from the chassis, and I promised to do a follow-up video about the condition of the chassis and a bit more of an in-detail look. Now I haven't actually done anything since taking the body off, partially because of the time and also because I just like looking at the two side by side. I think it's just such a cool thing to see the whole chassis in its entirety with the engine, everything in situ next to the body. It kind of makes me feel like I'm playing with an old corgi toy or something, seeing the two together, sort of taking your toy cars apart. But I really should progress with this project. So we'll do this little bit of a walk around of the chassis and its condition, and what I'll try and do is explain a bit about the chassis and the different parts of it as well, just to give it a bit more content. So let's dive in. So the chassis then really is just a series of steel box sections and tubes welded together so that the suspension has got something to bolt to and it's somewhere to support the engine. Now at the front we've got a more sort of box-like area where the front suspension is bolted to, where the rear is more sort of tubular in construction, and it's where the engine cradle is and where the rear suspension bolts to. And in the middle we've kind of got this girder-like structure to kind of link the two together and provide somewhere for the gear shifter to sit. So looking at it, it does look quite simple, and that's kind of where the genius of Lotus comes in really, because it is as simple as it can be, to be as light as it can be, but it is covered in loads of different brackets and little tabs and things like that. And I think during the restoration, the bigger sections of steel aren't going to be the troublesome part. I think it's going to be the detail bits and pieces, like the little tabs being bent up or little mounting holes that have been elongated where dirt or wear has occurred and need to be fixed. And it's important that we do spend a bit of time making sure that this chassis is right, because one of the Esprit's defining characteristics is its handling. So compromising the chassis is only going to compromise the overall experience of driving the Esprit at the end of it. So it's worth investing the time there. Let's go and have a look at the front suspension. So here we are at the front of the car, and it's probably what I'd call the more normal or least exotic part of the car, because you can see the structure is very much more square in fashion. There's lots of box section here at the front where I think where the anti-roll bar is mounted to, and the suspension actually comes from the Opel Ascona or the Vauxhall Cavalier. So quite an ordinary car there in terms of where it's kind of come from. And actually on my car, this end was the end which seemed to have the most rust issues. So when I was taking fasteners off the car, it was the front end which was a lot more problematic than the rear, just simply because I think where it was in that garage for so long, that's where the water was pooling, and I think that's where most of the corrosion has occurred. But looking at it now, a lot of it does just seem to be sort of surface rust on the steel of the chassis itself, and things have survived, like the foam here that you can see, which was supporting the I think the steering column, or even the pedal box, or even the servos or something. Whatever was above here, but the foam is still intact here, which kind of shows that it hasn't deteriorated too much. And you can see I've still left these little washer donut things from when the body was mounted on here. One thing I have noticed though is in the front suspension itself is that the coil springs have snapped. So I don't know whether that's happened during the storage. They've just got old and rusty and have snapped then, or maybe that was one of the reasons why it was off the road. Maybe it had broken suspension, who knows. But yeah, as far as the front's concerned, there's no damage as such. The square tubing seems to be straight, and everything looks complete. So really I'm hoping that the majority of this restoration is going to be taking back the surface rust and painting it, making it good again, but we'll just have to see once everything's disassembled. And then moving to the middle section, it's much the same story. We've got some of the original paint is left kind of underneath where the foam was stuck, and the remnants of the foam are still here. They haven't completely disappeared, but it's all turned very powdery and it's making a bit of a mess on the garage floor here. But a bit further down you can see where the surface corrosion has kind of come up here, and it's like I said, at the front of the car it's worse where it's kind of flaking off there, but again, no holes, no damage, everything seems to be straight at least. And in fact, a lot of these tabs that are holding on the, I think this is the clutch cable perhaps, and the brake line, they all seem to be in okay condition and not too corroded. They've still got their rubber covers on them, so we'll see what condition they're in once we start taking those cables off and that kind of stuff. But let's have a look at the back, because that's more interesting. Okay, so here we are at the back of the car, and I think this is the more interesting and certainly more exotic end compared to the front. And we see a lot more Lotus bespoke stuff back here, notably the engine, which is the Lotus 907 engine, which has its origins, I think, sort of based on a Vauxhall Slant 4, but designed and built by Lotus into the 907, because I think the Vauxhall was maybe single cam and might have been a steel block rather than the Lotus one, which is aluminium block with double overhead cams here, 16 valve. And we've also got the rear suspension, which is a Chapman strut design with this trailing arm, and the upper link of the setup is the drive shaft, which of course makes the drive shafts wear out, but it reduces weight. And I think the idea of the car was to try and get some of the Formula One technology or racing technology at the time into a road car, and that was kind of the thing which separates the early Esprit from the later ones, because it does have more of that kind of stuff on here. So the Chapman strut design, and then the inboard brakes as well, which was kind of on vogue for racing cars at the time, to try and keep mass towards the middle of the car to improve handling. So in terms of condition of the chassis, we've got lots of tubes, as I mentioned, a bit different to the front, more tubular construction, and the paint is flaking off, lots of surface rust as per the front as well. Interestingly, there is some bare metal showing just down here, so I don't know if that's something that's rubbed while I've been trying to get bits and pieces off. Maybe that's where the fuel tank thing went through there, or some kind of tube was rubbing on it, but it looks fresh. I don't think it's been there for a long time, because otherwise it'd be rusty unless some heat's got to it and kind of changed it there. We can still see some foam on top of the chassis, which just shows that there was some cushioning between the chassis and the body, and the little donuts again I've still got here, which separate, just keep the two slightly apart. We can also see the Citroen Maserati transaxle gearbox just hanging out the back there, which I think is really cool. I really love the fact this engine is longitudinal rather than transverse. Just kind of gives it a bit of symmetry, even though it's a slant 4, and differentiates it from things like an MR2, which is kind of like more of a front wheel drive car that's been reversed kind of thing. This is a lot more kind of what more modern supercars kind of follow. I mean, I know that the Lamborghini Miura had a transverse V12, and some of the earlier Ferrari mid-engine cars also had transverse V8s, but yeah, I like the fact that it's down the middle. It makes sense to me. So that's pretty much all there is to talk about, I think, in terms of the condition of the chassis. We won't really know what sort of rust damage there is until I get it all stripped off and blasted. But certainly what I'm quite pleased about is that there doesn't seem to be any evidence of crash damage. There's no bent stuff. And yeah, I'm just really looking forward to cracking on with this. So the next steps, I think, is going to be sort of stripping this chassis down and starting at the back. So I have to take off this exhaust. One, because it's strapped to things that I need to take off, but also I keep catching my leg on the exhaust pipes while I'm getting beers out of that fridge. So that needs to come off ASAP. And then it's just working from the back forward, so then just unbolting things to eventually get the engine out, and then I can start looking at taking the suspension off and that kind of stuff to try and get back to that bare chassis. So that's it for this time. Thank you so much for watching, and continue to follow my Lotus Esprit restoration project. As I mentioned, I do have another distraction in the garage, this motorbike, which I will probably talk about in the next video, actually. Quite excited to share that with you. But yeah, until the next time, have a good one. See you later. Bye.